Welcome to Screams from the Center, where I hope to provide information on topics I find interesting and give my take on them. In this episode, we are not a Christian nation. Off-label promoting? A woman ransoms her fetus. And then the rest of that story. Author Kevin Cruz has written several articles about how we're not a Christian nation. Now, a few weeks ago, public policy polling reported that 57% of Republicans favored making the United States officially a Christian nation. A survey by the First Amendment Center showed that 55% of Americans already believed we were one. Now, it's understandable that this is confusing because we're always being talked about how this is a Christian nation by our politicians. There are meetings prayers at meetings. There are prayers to open up Congress. There's prayers to open up the Senate. The presidents typically espouse in their belief in God and say that they govern by that. Most politicians say that we're a Christian nation, so, it's understandable. But the truth of the matter is our founding fathers did not actually create this as a Christian nation. Now, you can make that argument, but our founding fathers signed a treaty called the Treaty of Tripoli that implicitly said that we are not founded as a Christian nation. We don't operate as a Christian nation. Now, the country involved in that treaty, other than the United States, does not exist in the same form. So a lot of conservatives say that that treaty is null and void and meaningless. Well, the specific treaty between those two peoples may not actually enforceable anymore, but that doesn't mean that the concept behind it. The founding fathers went on the record and signed a treaty saying that we're not a Christian nation. So just because we don't follow that treaty anymore doesn't suddenly mean that the founding fathers founded the country on Christianity. It just doesn't work like that. But where did this come from? Really, the idea that the United States is a Christian nation did not come about until the 20th century. Sure, people invoked religion and used religion, and there was religion in places where a lot of secularists say it's not appropriate today. So, where did this come from? Well, back during the era of the New Deal, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the 1930s and 40s, business leaders found themselves on the defensive because they were getting regulated. Social programs were causing increases in taxes and cutting into profits. So they tried to figure out ways to fight back. Now, FDR was actually supported by many religious organizations, Catholics in particular, because they were always concerned about the poor. So the precedents didn't change until the New Deal. What happened was there was a meeting in the 1940s between about 5,000 corporate heads. And these are places like people like Harvey Firestone, Conrad Hilton, E.F. Hutton, Fred Maytag, leaders of the industries, of the various industries, coming together, trying to figure out exactly how they could combat the New Deal. A little-known figure at the time, Reverend James W. Fifield, came onto stage and spoke. He's now known as the 13th Apostle of Big Business, or the St. Paul of Prosperity. And what he said was that we should start preaching to the pews of millions of people that prosperity is God's blessing, a type of neo-Calvinism that he was promoting to these corporate leaders. That these preachers should go to their churches and tell people that welfare, the New Deal, all of these programs are hurting you, they're hurting your chances to get into heaven. He created national organizations trying to promote this process, funded by these corporate leaders. He founded the First Congregational Church in Los Angeles. He said reading the Bible was like eating fish. We take the bones out of it to enjoy the meat. All of the parts are not of equal value. And this is the basis he used to undermine the teachings of Jesus. He dismissed New Testament warnings about the corrupting nature of wealth. He instead paired Christianity and capitalism against the New Deal's pagan statism. He made the argument that government aid to the poor was a secular form of religion, a state worship. Through this national organization, he promoted freedom under God. By the 40s, his group was spreading the gospel of faith and free enterprise in a mass-circulated monthly magazine. He had programs airing on over 800 stations in the nation. He encouraged ministers to preach this prosperity gospel, to tell them that competitions, and also create competitions for cash for preaching these things. So that persisted for the next decade or so. And then we get in Reverend Billy Graham, another apostle of this prosperity religion, prosperity theology. In the early 50s, he supported corporate interests so zealously that in London, in a paper, they called him the big business evangelical. Mr. Graham went to Washington, made Congress his congregation. He recruited representatives to serve as ushers at packed event rival meetings. He helped force Congress to establish the National Day of Prayer. And he said himself, if he ran for President of the United States, that he would do so on the platform of calling people back to God, back to Christ, and back to the Bible. So, these are the founders of the prosperity gospel that is taught in many churches today, particularly Protestant versions of churches. It is the basis for succoring Republicans into voting against their best interest and to vote for corporate interest. These people are not your friends. They're not here to help you. The idea of shutting down things that were designed to help the middle class because some preacher is making a neo-Calvinistic interpretation of the Bible and throwing out in whole cloth sections of the Bible where Jesus talks about you should help the poor. This is wrong. It's immoral. Now, you could sit there and say this is the area that the church should be taking care of, that the church should be doing these services. That's fine. You can make that argument. But the trouble with doing that is a church can turn you away. A church can say, well, you're not my religion, so I don't have to help you. Or you're not a member of my congregation, so I don't need to help you. And that's why people like Franklin Delano Roosevelt stepped in, and then later Lyndon Johnson stepped in and said, the government is going to do this for the people, for all the people in need, not just the ones belonging to something. And that's where we are basically today. Thank you. I want to take a minute to talk about a topic called off-label promotion. This is concerning drugs. And it's the concept of you created a drug to be something like to reduce cholesterol, but it has a side effect of losing weight, or you have a heart pill that regulates blood pressure, and it turns out that it has a side effect of giving you an erect penis. And they relabel these drugs, and it's called off-label promotion. Sometimes the drugs are available as this off-label without a prescription. However, most of these drugs do actually need to pass an FDA inspection. Recently, the FDA was testing one of these off-label promotion products, and they denied the request. So the drug company involved with this is suing the government and even the validity of having a Food and Drug Administration over the fact that they denied this request. They wanted to expand the drug into a new population, a new segment of society based on its side effect. If it goes to the Supreme Court, if it's voted in favor by the Supreme Court, basically this would be taking us back to the 1800s, during the snake oil salesman days, before there was any kind of regulation, when just about anything can be called a medicine for anything else. Sure, you're going to probably see cheap drugs, but they're not going to work. So this is a dangerous cliff that we're about to drive off of. And this pro-business Supreme Court stands at the crossroads. Will they do the right thing and protect the American people, or will they vote to protect the drug companies? Now, without thinking, I already know that Thomas and Scalia, for instance, are definitely going to back the businesses. Samuel Alito, he's a bit of an oddball. He tends to vote regularly conservative, but his track record before he got on the Supreme Court was often to side with the government on things. So who knows, but my money is on Alito also voting for the drug companies. Basically, the only question I have is Kennedy. Kennedy is usually pro-business, but sometimes he's been a maverick on these things. Roberts, I do expect to actually vote for the drug companies on this, but he's thrown a few surprises at us too. Seems that he wants a legacy on his court, so maybe he'll make the right decision. We'll find out. Again, this is about off-label promotion. The idea of using a drug that had one intended purpose, but has a side effect that has another intended purpose, and to sell it for that side effect purpose. The most famous one is Viagra. Think about it. An interesting article in the news. A woman asked pro-life movement to donate $1 million to prevent her abortion. Now, several people in both the pro-choice and pro-life movements have criticized this website. Apparently it's legit. She describes herself as a 26-year-old graduate student who lives in a state that recently passed a law requiring women to wait 72 hours after consultation with a doctor before getting an abortion. Last month, for instance, North Carolina became the fourth state after Missouri, South Dakota, and Utah to adopt such laws. So it's reasonable to assume she might be in one of those states. So, beginning on July 7th, the woman will give pro-life advocates 72 hours to make donations. If they reach $1 million, she said that she'll deliver the baby and give it up for adoption and put all the money in the trust fund for the child. If that amount is not raised, she will return the donations and go through with the abortion she has scheduled for July 10th. Now, the author of the website seems skeptical that the $1 million sum will be raised. There's some question as to whether or not it's serious or legitimate. So, my take on this is I'm also confused. I'm not sure. I think as a political statement and a statement of the affirmation of rights that this is powerful. It'll get the attention of people because the pro-life movement often makes a couple of mistakes when it comes to abortion. First off, they want to sit there and tell us that abortion is murder, and every time a fetus is aborted, it is the death of a child, a human child. If you take that for its face value, then that means that every mother is like a mafia boss, and every doctor that performs an abortion is like the hitman. These are, when a hit is put out on a person, it's premeditated, it's first degree, it is severely punishable. However, when we see the laws in place and when we see the kinds of punishment, if any conservative pro-life groups mention punishment, we don't see the same kind of punishment given to murderers and hitmen and accomplices. We see things like fines and maybe some jail time. So if you're going to be consistent in the idea that abortion is murder, then you need to be consistent with the punishment. And if you won and make abortion illegal, then you have to declare it a murder in the first degree. Therefore, you have to go after everybody who's gotten an abortion and the doctors who perform them, now, in the past, and in the future. So, on to the woman here. I don't think that conservatives will put up the money for this. I don't think she'll get even close to the $1 million. Because in the end, I don't really feel the conservative movement honestly believes that an aborted fetus is a murder of a child. I don't believe that they think it's any more life than how pro-choice people think of it, as potential life. And the reason I'm saying that is it's a case of putting your money where your mouth is. George Carlin used to say things along the lines of, Republicans care about the fetus until it's born. And a lot of other liberals have said the same kinds of things. And I think that's what's in play at this point. And I don't think she's going to get much of anything. There might be a few true believers who would donate to prevent the death of anybody, but it seems that the conservative movement finds it far easier to find an unstable person to commit murder and shoot up abortion clinics and bomb abortion clinics than they would to do something that would monetarily help that child. Because as she says, if she gets the $1 million, she'll carry the baby to term, put it up for adoption, and that baby has $1 million trust fund. It seems pretty reasonable to me. Now, on the other end, you can sit there and say, well, she's in effect, if you believe that a fetus is as much alive as you and me, she is in effect taking someone hostage. She is kidnapping someone. She's a terrorist in many respects. Are they going to make those kinds of calls? Again, they're going to find lots of ways to comment on what she's doing, but they're not going to donate and save that child's life because they don't care. I don't think the conservative movement cares. And I know the conservative politicians don't. They want the votes of the people who are on the religious right who want these things. And I've said it for a long time that I think birth control and abortion rights are a veiled attempt by the right to control women. They want to make it so that a woman has no choices in her life. I don't think that's necessarily from a sexist view that many feminists today would equate to, but it is a form of sexism, and it's rather ugly. So, what would you do? Would you donate to save that baby's life? Would you not care? Do you think abortion is wrong? Do you think abortion is right? Let me know. Thank you. In a different segment, I talked about a woman who was holding her fetus ransom, demanding that pro-lifers actually make the decision and save her baby. She wanted to raise $1 million to prevent her abortion. And she had promised that she would put the baby out for adoption and that money would go into a trust fund. I thought at the time I was rather conflicted and a little confused by it. I didn't quite understand what the point was for it. I do find it an interesting exercise. The idea that, if pro-lifers really do think that abortion is murder, well, Couldn't they chip in a few bucks? Supposedly there's over 100 million people who are pro-life. It wouldn't even take $1 from each of those to equal $1 million. So it's chump change for people on the right. The Liberty Organization, some sort of church group, mega churches. There's plenty of places that could donate the money to ransom off this baby, to pay the ransom. And, we can call it a ransom. We can call her a terrorist if you want. We can call her whatever we want. It turns out the story's not true. It was a publicity stunt to promote a book from a controversial author who likes to do these sort of things. The author is very pro-choice, more so than I would even consider myself. I mean, kind of a pro-death almost. But not that I think that pro-choice is pro-death, but this is a person who was rather interesting about it. I'm not going to name them. You can look it up, because I don't want to give this person any credit. But it turns out that this story was indeed a publicity stunt to sell a book. But it does raise an interesting point. What if someone tried to do this? Is it the obligation of Christians who believe that in the sanctity of life there to put money into it to pay this ransom off? This is, in their eyes at least, the most innocent of innocents. It's not illegal to get an abortion. She's not committing terrorism. So you have to ask yourself, do you treat it like terrorism? Do you treat it like a hostage situation and fight against it? Or do you give in, support your principles, and save that baby's life? I find it an interesting moral challenge. I, of course, wouldn't pay a dime for it. Though, I would advocate that if that's your belief, you should do it. Thank you. Thank you for joining me in this episode of Screams from the Center. Please leave comments below on how I can improve. Please subscribe, like, and share this video with others. My blog is at screamsfromthecenter.wordpress.com. I'm on Twitter at screamsftcenter and on Facebook at Screams from the Center. Thank you.